The finale of Andor gave us a pretty bittersweet goodbye to Luthen, and I think in the episodes leading up to his final moments, the show has been dropping a lot of hints along the way to let us know that Luthen's time is coming to an end. So obviously Luthen couldn't go to Yavin simply because he died. That would be the most straightforward answer, but I actually think that there is a more character-driven reason as to why he couldn't leave Coruscant. In other words, Luthen really did have to die and move on for the rebellion to succeed. The show gives clues in the last few episodes of Season 2. The hints really kick off when we first hear Luthen talking to Clea about how he can't keep track of the lies they've set up.
I can't keep track anymore. All this lies we've laid, all this information.
Essentially letting the audience know that Luthen has been in the game for so long that it's all starting to take a toll on him. Unlike Clea, Luthen is much older and has been fighting for the Empire far longer than she has, so it's no surprise that he is feeling the weight of all of it. We also get more of this sentiment in another conversation with Clea just before he meets Lonnie, where Clea warns him to leave if things seem off, but Luthen simply responds with,
I think we used up all the perfect.
Once again letting us, the audience, know that Luthen seems to feel that his time is near. Flashback to Mon Mothma's great escape. In the lead up to the operation, we hear Cassian tell Luthen to pack up and leave Coruscant, to join him and the others on Yavin, something which he refuses. Cassian obviously doesn't understand the rationale as he knows the ISB will be out for blood once Mon escapes, and Coruscant is going to get real hot for guys like Luthen. In fact, between Mon's escape and Luthen's end, he's had in fact a single year's worth of time to make an escape, well before Deidre would have found him anyways. So the question then becomes, why was Luthen so reluctant to go to Yavin, and what really made him decide to stay on Coruscant? After all, there was no way he would have known that there was a bigger secret the Empire was hiding, at least not after Lonnie shared the information regarding the Death Star. To really answer this question, I think we need to go all the way back to Season 1 when we first see Luthen meet Lonnie for the first time on screen. In Luthen's iconic monologue, we actually learn more about his motivations and what he really thinks of himself, and it's really here that we can get a better understanding that even if Luthen had managed to escape Dedra, Luthen's journey was at an end regardless, which is why Luthen could never have gone to Yavin. Simply put, in Luthen's speech to Lonnie, we hear that Luthen actually hates himself. He acknowledges the sacrifices and the dirty things he's had to do to fight against the Empire.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy.
And what we learn from this is that Luthen essentially sees himself as a force of vengeance against the Empire. He doesn't really see himself as a human being worthy of happiness or otherwise. Which is why later in his speech he also says this.
I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
And I think this particular sentence really encapsulates the reason as to why he couldn't have gone to Yavin. Simply put, Luthen never intended to see better days or brighter times. Since Season 1, Luthen knew that his journey and fight against the Empire could only end one way, with his death.
I share my dreams with ghosts.
And so what we see is a man who fights not because he wants to enjoy life free from tyranny and oppression, but so that others can. Luthen essentially sees himself as a man who has done unspeakable and unforgivable things, that he doesn't deserve to enjoy the simple pleasures of life out in the sun. And so when the rebels finally gather, we see them not hiding in the shadows like before, but openly gathering out in the open underneath the sun. Essentially, the rebellion has evolved from the days of hiding to being a movement strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet in open defiance against the Empire. And there is a certain joy in this that the Andor show demonstrates to us. When we see the rebels on Yavin, we see them laughing, enjoying themselves, eating and moving out in the open. We see a certain level of companionship and normalcy that we have never seen the rebels experience in this show before. For the first time in a while, we see figures like Cassian openly laughing and making merry, and others like Mon openly relaxed and enjoying herself at breakfast. Compare this to the episodes prior, all of these characters were never able to enjoy this openness in their fight against the Empire. And so for Luthen, this was never for him. In fact, in his mind, he doesn't deserve this.
I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do.
So what we see throughout the 2 seasons is him sacrificing his morality and consciousness so that others can enjoy the sun, a pleasure that he decidedly knew wasn't for him to enjoy. Another point to consider is that the rebellion by the end of Season 2 has kinda evolved away from Luthen's style of rebellion, something which he knew wouldn't fit his way of doing things. Simply put, the Rebel Alliance is a movement that isn't just built on the premise of anti-Empire, but it's also built on a moral component, in that the Rebel Alliance tries to ensure that they have the moral high ground compared to the Empire, which gives it its legitimacy. When you have figures like Mon and Bail leading the Rebel Alliance, you can be sure that their movement has every intent to be a force for good, to beat the Empire not just on the field of battle but morally as well, creating a clear separation that the Rebel Alliance just isn't another version of the Empire when it succeeds. This is in part another reason why the Rebel Alliance was able to pull together so many rebelling factions together despite certain apparent differences, something which Luthen's way of doing has failed consistently over the last 2 seasons. In fact, starting from Season 1, we see Luthen trying to appeal to Saw to convince him into the merits of a united rebel front, but ultimately he gets turned down simply because Saw doesn't trust him or his motives. Now granted, we know that Saw is a paranoid man, so it would have failed either way, but fast forward to Season 2, and we see this through the eyes of Cassian. After being captured by rebels on Yavin, Cassian quickly figures out that they are part of the Maya Pei Brigade, something which Luthen also actively supplies. But due to Luthen's stress on secrecy and protocol, we see that Cassian wasn't able to bridge the gap between these rebels and unable to get them to trust him in order to work together to find a way off the planet, despite the fact that they all had a common enemy. We see this again later with the Gormans and Luthen's willingness to use them as a means of inciting greater rebellion in the galaxy, even if it means getting them burnt. His Machiavellian approach to resistance against the Empire essentially stands on an empty moral ground that, while creates a lot of noise, doesn't really provide any normative legitimacy a bigger movement like the Rebel Alliance requires.
I yearned to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet.
Simply put, within the Star Wars universe, a movement built upon mutual hate for the Empire will likely fail. So what we see is essentially Luthen making all the moral sacrifices to get the rebellion to where it is today, and then handing off the torch of responsibility to the likes of Mon, a type of leadership that even he recognizes is what the galaxy needs more now than ever. Not to mention, there is also no real guarantee that there is a place for Luthen in this new type of rebellion.
Paranoia, his secrecy, his inability to collaborate.
Considering what we see at the Rebel Alliance Council, it's pretty clear that its leadership doesn't quite appreciate Luthen's brand of any means necessary style of rebellion. So even if Luthen were to go to Yavin, his presence might create more conflict and disunity within the growing rebellion. There is also a point to be said that towards the last few episodes of Season 2, the show makes a lot of effort to reintroduce the elements of the Force. It starts off with Luthen pondering about Cassian's appearance in critical times, then with the Force Healer, and then later with the Tuca Cat, a species well known for its connection to the Force. So what we see here is Hope and the Force returning back to the galaxy, guiding the rebellion. What we eventually get is a rebellion that is very much in tune with the Force, with phrases such as,
"May the Force be with you, Captain,"
becoming more common, whereas previously we don't see a single rebel even use this phrase. So in other words, you can kinda see this one as the Force taking back the reins of things as it seeks to rebalance itself in the galaxy. This is more of a metaphysical explanation for why Luthen's brand of rebellion wouldn't continue to work, but I think within the context of Star Wars it does make a lot of sense. So what we see is that the reason why Luthen could have never gone to Yavin is simply the case that his brand of rebellion just isn't what the galaxy needs anymore. And I think a part of Luthen recognizes this as he decides to let it go once he knew the ISB were getting close. And once he knew that the rebellion had everything it needed to stand on its own 2 feet, allowing him to make one final sacrifice so that others could enjoy the sun he never could. Anyways, that's all for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.